All right, so lesson 8.3 is on adjective clauses and it's on page 144. And again, this lesson is kind of review on stuff that you should already know or that we already learned either this year or last year. So, as your warm up, without looking at your notes, I want you to define what a phrase is. You were correct if you said a phrase is a group of words used as a single part of speech. And this has no subject or predicate, so it cannot stand alone. An adjective clause is defined as a group of words that contains a subject and a predicate. So you already see how they're different. And there's two types of clauses. There's an independent clause, which can stand alone, or a dependent clause, which cannot stand alone. You should already know both of those. So here's an example. Since I turned 18, I am now considered a legal adult. So since I turned 18 is a dependent clause. It cannot stand alone. It leaves you wanting more information. Since I turned 18, I am now considered a legal adult. That's an independent clause. That can stand alone. Okay? So an adjective clause typically describes a noun or a pronoun. It is dependent, which means that it cannot stand alone. And it usually begins with a relative pronoun. So those are who, whom, which, whose. I don't know why I typed which twice. That. The list is in the book on page 144. And these also relate to antecedents in the independent clause. An antecedent is the word that a pronoun takes place. So if it were Mary and you said her or she, Mary is the antecedent of her or she. And I'll give you an example. Carly, who plays professional basketball, tore her ACL this year. So who is the relative pronoun for Carly? Carly is the antecedent. And this whole yellow highlighted part, who plays professional basketball, that is an adjective clause. It cannot stand alone. It begins with a relative pronoun and it has an antecedent. Checks all three things. So I encourage you to read the lesson on page 144, look at those examples, because the more practice you get, the better you are going to understand this concept. We're going to do exercise 1 together. I encourage you to follow along in the book. We're only going to do the first 4 because I think this is a fairly easy lesson. So number 1, it says, I traveled to Newfoundland with my Uncle Joel, who had invited me on the trip. So I know that who is a relative pronoun. So everything after that comma is the adjective clause. Who had invited me on the trip. And who is that referring to? It's referring to Joel. Okay? Number 2, Joel is a person whose ideas for adventures always turn out well. The relative pronoun is whose, so it's that whole phrase. Whose ideas for adventures always turn out well. And that describes the person. Joel is a person whose ideas. So if you've already noticed a pattern, the relative pronoun is usually right after its antecedent. So who was after Joel? Whose was after person. So number 3, it says his plan, which he presented as a trip to Newfoundland during the winter, was unusual. So which he presented, blah blah, is referring to the plan. And number 4, it seems suited to people who love cold weather. Who love cold weather is referring to people. So that's it for this lesson. You only need to do exercise 2 on Google Classroom as your exit ticket. Let me know if you have any questions.